Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to our cozy little corner of the internet. I'm Pen and today I'll be starting a new fic called It's Not Love If You Run Away When It's Hard by Lita Cakes. For those of you that have been on my channel for a while and this isn't the first video you've seen, you'll know that I've read another one of Lita Cakes' fics, long fics, and another one of their one-shots. I'll leave them down in the cards at the end, or I don't know. But I'll leave them somewhere. But this is a little bit longer than the last one that I read. 82,000 words with 15 complete chapters. This, just so you know, has mentions of suicide, abuse, sexual abuse, and this chapter specifically has not quite graphic, but a little bit of a description of vomiting. Anyway, here is a summary for the fic. Izuku stared down at the candle in his hand. The wax was melted around the base and warming his hand through the paper cover. It might not be burning, but he wished it was. He did not want to be here. Actually, that was a lie. He wanted to be here, but he just wished this was a monthly meeting instead of a vigil. This was the third vigil he had been to this year, and it was only February. Last night, a 6-year-old girl named Asami Sato took her life by swallowing a bottle of her mother's pills. She did this only 2 hours after her own mother told her she should have never been born. Asami Sato was born quirkless. She was 6, and had not developed a quirk at 4 like the majority of the population. Now, Asami Sato was an orchid, a beautiful, fleeting memory. Or, Izuku is quirkless and All Might does not see his potential for heroics. His last effort to become a hero gets him accepted into UA as the first Quirkless student, but the universe keeps trying to break his spirit. I hope you guys all enjoyed this, and make sure to take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys later in the fic. See ya! Chapter 1. Izuku stared down at the candle in his hand. The wax was melting around the base, warming his hand through the paper cover. It might not be burning, but he wished it was. He didn't want to be here. Actually, that was a lie. He wanted to be here, but he wished this was a regular monthly meeting instead of a vigil. This was the third vigil he had been to this year, and it was only February. Last night, a 6-year-old girl named Asami Sato took her life by swallowing a bottle of her mother's pills. She did this only 2 hours after her mother told her that she should have never been born. Asami Sato was born quirkless. She was 6 and had not developed a quirk at 4 like the majority of the population. She was seen as a useless, weak, defective, geneless, diseased. All of these terms were synonymous with quirkless. Izuku had heard all of them in countless times in his 14 short years on this earth. Now, Asami Sato was an orchid, a beautiful, fleeting memory. She was not given a funeral, as was customary for quirkless people. Not many funeral homes wanted to touch their bodies, so the quirkless community held a vigil. It was their tradition, their way of life. The community in Musashafu was small, and growing smaller by the year. But Izuku was hopeful for the new teenagers amongst them who had stuck it out against the abuse and hatred. It wasn't easy. And none of them faulted this little girl for her choice to leave. Izuku shifted his eyes to his left wrist. He wore 5 thin metal bands in varying colours. Each one meant something different. The 2 white bands he wore denoted him as a suicide survivor, with 2 attempts. The red one said a friend had committed suicide. He had gotten that one last year when his closest friends in the community took their own life. The blue one was for the same person, the year prior, when they tried to commit suicide, and Izuku stopped them. Blue bands were only earned as a gift from the person who attempted to kill themselves. The last one, his orange band, denoted him as not just a quirkless abuse survivor, but also an abuse survivor of another kind. He didn't like to talk about that band. It was a gift from one of the elders of the community who had found out about his childhood before his father left. A shiver ran down Izuku's spine. He shouldn't be thinking about that right now. He shifted his eyes back to the small altar they had set up with a few pictures of Asami. She was a sweet girl. She had only found the community a few months ago when the discrimination started for her. Another girl, Emmy, was sobbing at the front of the altar they'd set up. Emmy had taken Asami as a mentee. The older kids and elders of the community would mentor the younger ones, in an effort to keep them alive and help them as they grew up. But it wasn't enough this time. Izuku knew exactly what she was feeling: guilt. The red band on his arm burned against his skin. His best friend and also his first mentee. He had been 11 when he let himself fly off the edge of a roof. Izuku had cried, screamed, and sobbed for hours when he found out. Then, he had gone catatonic for a week, inconsolable and disconnected from the world. This was their reality. The Quirkless community was dwindling every year. When Izuku was born, there was about 15% of the population that was Quirkless. In less than 15 years, that population dropped to 9%. He had done the math, and it wasn't pretty. Out of the 6% they lost, only 0.5% of that group had been above 70, and another 0.5% had been above 50. That 1% made up their deaths by natural causes. The remaining 5%, suicide or murder. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks, unabated, as Emmy screamed in front of them. One of the elders fell to his knees beside her and wrapped her in his arms. Izuku didn't have the strength to take on that role. He couldn't, not this time. It hurt too much. Despite the high suicide rates, it was rare for one so young to be taken, 6 years old. The metal bands on his wrists clattered in the night air as he put his hand to his mouth to stop an anguished sob from escaping his lips. The sound made a few people turn around him twitch, a reminder of their ever-growing sorrow. But he wasn't the only one with metal bands. No, almost everyone here had several. Izuku's 5 was, by far, not the greatest number worn amongst the dozen or so people present. They were on a roof of a residential apartment building one of the elders lived in. The roof was open for anyone to use. It had a garden and a play area for children, as well as a torii gate and an altar for ceremonies. Izuku looked up to the torii gate above Emmy and silently asked the gods, for some reason behind their grief, why was this their existence? Why did they have to endure it? Why did the world hate them for being born without superhuman powers? If anything, they were more human than the quirked populace, weren't they? They were the humans like the humans of 200 years ago, before quirks developed. But society didn't see it that way. They were an outcast, the unwanted, the unloved. The vigil ended at midnight. Izuku decided he would walk home. He didn't have the energy to get on the train and deal with other humans existing around him. They couldn't tell he was quirkless by appearance alone, at least not when he was wearing his black sneakers. The standard red high tops were one of the only shoes on the market made for quirkless people. Everyone knew those shoes, what those damn shoes meant, so quirkless people tried very hard to avoid wearing them. Izuku learned pretty young how to modify shoes to fit his extra toe joint. He learnt from a ton of YouTube tutorials about cobbling and shoemaking, and also how to fit a good shoe when breaking it in. Of course, none of these were designed for the quirkless community, but Izuku had made it work. Izuku still had red high tops. They were simply the easiest shoes to wear and were the cheapest shit because of the lack of demand for them. Some days he also wanted to take pride in what he was, who he was. He wanted to take pride in it because if he didn't, he'd probably end up next on that damn roof as a picture on an altar. He rubbed the right band on his wrist as he walked. The first time, he sliced down his left arm. The scar was still bright and red on his skin. Only a year and a half healed. His mother found him, cursed him, and stapled his arm shut before the ambulance got there. She vowed he would not make her some widowed mother left to mourn a son she never wanted after said son pushed the husband she loved away. Living was a punishment in her mind. Forcing Izuku to live was her way of torturing him. He didn't get the easy way out. Izuku didn't get to just die. The second time, he decided the rooftop route. He tried, really. He had tried so hard, but luck and maybe the universe just weren't on his side. As he free fell down in a rush of wind and fear, his body caught on a lamppost. He'd broken 4 of his ribs and his right arm, but the cut to the momentum of his fall only managed to the hit cut the momentum of his fall, and he only managed to get a nasty concussion from cracking his skull on the sidewalk. He'd lain there laughing, despite the agony at the absurdity of it all. He didn't go to the hospital, but he spent a week in bed from the concussion. His mother thought he just had the flu. His right arm was slightly crooked from not being completely set, but only Izuku noticed it anymore. It didn't matter, after all. He was weak, diseased. The Quirkless were supposedly prone to illness. And of course, I always forget to turn that off. The statistic was false, though. They weren't any more likely to get the flu than anyone else. Actually, it was the opposite in most cases. Quirkless people had a higher immune system and were far more prone to injury, and though they were far more prone to injury and death, more often than not due to no fault of their own. There was evidence, buried as it may be, that they were less prone to cancer, major illness, and disease. Sadly, this fact did not help them at all. The moon was shining over the river as Izuku walked through an underpass to get home. He took this route when he wanted to avoid people. There was just no way he could tolerate being around quirked people right now. He was still crying. He'd have to get this suit dry cleaned. He'd only owned one good black suit for vigils. He really should take better care of it. Yet, once again, the universe decided against him. It was against him and his one good suit. A nearby sewer grate rattled open and burst into the air. Izuku watched the metal plate fly above his head and thunk onto the concrete nearby. What the? A second later, he couldn't breathe. He was covered enveloped in some kind of disgusting sludge that tasted like acid. It was forcing itself through every orifice of his body, mouth, nose, ears, eyes, and even through his clothing. Izuku's body tried to claw itself free from the sludge, feeling more violated than even his father's abuse when he was only a child. "Stop squirming, kid. I need a place to hide. You'll make a great skin suit." "What?" Izuku screamed, or he tried to, but it was muffled by the sludge. This only gave the villain a bigger opening to force himself into. Izuku was suffocating. He clawed at his throat, crossed his legs, and tried his hardest to close his eyes and not breathe through his nose. It wasn't working. Why wasn't it working? Memories flashed in his mind, images of his bedroom, of hands, of so many hands, all over him. His skin crawled, and not from the sludge monster touching him. But just as fast as the assault began, it stopped. Izuku's body was blown backwards against the wall of the underpass, and the sludge splattered around him and slid down the wall. He collapsed on the ground, immediately vomiting the greenish clear goop from his lungs and stomach. It took about 3 rounds of heaving to get most of it from within his body, and he felt like some parts were still in his ears and other places he didn't want to think about, and fear it would cause more damage than to his already fragile mind. "Fear not, for I am here." All Might? Izuku looked up, finding his biggest hero standing there with both hands on his hips and a huge smile on his muscled face. Are you well? Are you quite well, citizen?" Izuku shrugged, then another wave of nausea hit him, and he was vomiting all over again, but this time the remains of his meager dinner. When he finally felt like he got his body back under control, he sat back against the wall and took a few breaths. All Might was busy scooping the villain into soda bottles he'd pulled out of a nearby trash can. That seemed fitting for the piece of shit that tried to just make a damn skin suit out of Izuku's body. Damn, that was disgusting. Izuku shivered. "I have alerted the police and of your location for medical treatment. I must be off. Say so, citizen." Wait. Izuku scrambled up and grabbed All Might's shirt. He was in civilian clothing, clearly not on duty when he had started to chase the villain. "Wait, please, I just have one question." "I already signed your notebook, my boy." Izuku flinched at the use of boy. "No, not that." All Might paused. He set down the soda bottles in his cargo pants and nodded for Izuku to continue. I need to know, can I be a hero like you if I don't? Should he really be asking this? He would be outing himself to his favourite hero, but he always imagined All Might, of all heroes, would support the Quirkless community. He imagined that this hero, the number one hero of Japan, would earn himself a gold band someday. That was a band specifically for those who had done amazing feats or made serious progress for the Quirkless community. He wanted to be the one to give him that gold band to give that gold band to his hero. In the end, he could not walk away from his hero without asking, so he cleared his throat and spoke. "Can I be a hero like you if I don't have a quirk?" All Might's usual face fell into something akin to disappointment. He'd known that look everywhere. His mother wore it often enough. Disgust coiled in his stomach, but it wasn't from the sludge villain. It wasn't from the sludge he just expelled. "I'm sorry, my boy." All Might reached out and ruffled his curls. Izuku flinched away. The hero did not seem to notice. But, hang on, what was my All Might voice? "I'm sorry, my boy, but most villains cannot be defeated without a power. You should find a more realistic dream. Become a policeman or even a firefighter. Or maybe an author or painter. There's so many paths for your kind. Now, if you excuse me, I have to return this villain to the police. Have a safe day, citizen." Sorry that All Might voice was absolutely terrible, but let's get going. Then, in a rush of wind, he was gone. Izuku collapsed to his knees, splashing in the remainder of the sludge villain he had just been assaulted by. His suit was ruined, his dreams were crushed, and he couldn't form a single thought. All he could hear rolling in his head was All Might's words. "Maybe you should find a more realistic dream. There's many paths for your kind." All Might, the number one hero in Japan, was a foxglove. The Quirkless community used a flower code to speak about people covertly. covertly. Quirkless people were lilies. Asami was an orchid now that she had committed suicide. Quirkless people were thorns when spoken about poorly, but foxglove was reserved for friends and family, or heroes, of quirkless people who had turned on them. Izuku's mother was a foxglove. His teachers and friends were too. He always thought his greatest hero would be the daisies, supporters, helpers of the community, but he was wrong. He was so terribly wrong. Hey, kid, you awake in there? The police officer was waving a hand in front of his face. All Might told us about what happened. Let's get you checked out by the medic. The official tried to grab Izuku's arm, but recoiled out of habit, survival instinct. It's okay, it's alright. We're just going to take you to the EMTs to give you a once-over and take you to the hospital if necessary. Izuku shook his head. He couldn't form words, so instead he signed. JSL was commonly used by the Quirkless community as a way to speak privately. The disabled community was nearly as close-knit as the Quirkless community was, and they both got along quite well and shared the language as solidarity. Izuku tried to sign, overwhelmed, no voice, please stop, but the police officer just stared at him dumbfounded. Hey, Sato, do we have a translator around here? I think the kid's deaf. He's making no signs with his hands or something. Kamihara's off duty today. Just try to explain it simple like. The kid's probably slow anyway. This was why they had such solidarity among the quirkless and disabled community. Quirk people viewed people like with disabilities almost as horribly as they viewed the quirkless. It was disgusting. Izuku didn't have the energy to fight this today. Hey, kid. The police officer waved his hand again. You need medical treatment. Izuku flipped him 2 middle fingers and gathered what little strength he had in his limbs to force himself to his feet and start walking. When the police officer tried to grab him again, Izuku spun on his heel in a quick martial arts dodge. He picked up a lot of self-defense moves since he was a kid, but he never had the confidence to use it, and he was also not usually provided the opportunity to defend himself. His peers cheated, horribly so. Sorry, that was a couple of neck cracks. I'm not sure if you heard that. The officer slipped in the sludge and landed on his face with his face in the muck. Izuku didn't look back as he bolted down the road towards home, leaving the signed notebook that had fallen out of his bag and the muck with the officer. The sounds of police officers calling for him died out after a couple of blocks. Thorns, all of them. Izuku put his hands to his sides of his head and screamed. When his head finally cleared, he took out his phone and pulled out the secure forms quirkless communities around Japan communicated on. He made a new public post. All Might is Foxglove. Do not engage. He is not safe. Find a more realistic dream. There's plenty of paths for your kind. As soon as he hit the post button, he was running again. His legs itched for movement. He needed a shower, a boiling hot shower, but he first needed to run. Running always cleared his mind, even when he was being chased by bullies. Running was a freedom he didn't find anywhere else in life. As he ran, the faint clatter of his metal bracelets. I don't know that word. Ricocheted. There we go. Ricocheted around his head like a pinball machine. It hurt, but he didn't try to stop it. Most people wore the bands pushed up on their arm during the day to keep them still and silent, hidden under sleeves, but Izuku did not. They weren't like giant bangles. They were just loose enough to slide over the hand and could be tightened usually. Some people, like Izuku, got them welded on, fitted. They were only just bigger than his wrists and couldn't be taken off unless cut with tin snips. The bands were a permanent reminder of what he had endured, what his fellow Quirkless had endured. Right now, the bands were a reminder of he was broken in the eyes of society, and he may never escape that horrid reality. There was nothing he could do. He had no power, no quirk, and no support from the wider population. Somehow, he found himself standing in front of his mother's apartment door. The lights were off, and the window next door. The lights were off in the window next to the door. Inko Midoriya wasn't home. Good. Izuku shakily put his key in the lock and shouldered the door open, practically collapsing into the entry genkan. Wow, my Japanese is really slipping. I don't know much in the first place, but hey. Genkan. He discarded his shoes and stumbled into the bathroom. He didn't realize he didn't even take his clothes off before getting into the freezing cold shower that made him gasp and shiver until the hot water kicked in. Izuku knew he was crying, but he couldn't feel it through the shower water pouring down on his face. Eventually, he stripped his clothes off once he felt like they were clean, free from all the sludge and gunk the villain had left on him. The clothes were hung over the shower rail while he scrubbed himself. He scrubbed every inch of his body until he saw red and a couple of places were bleeding raw. He used half a bar of soap and a quarter of his shampoo and conditioner. He still felt that sludge creeping around him, through him. Izuku tried to scramble out of the shower and put his head in the toilet before vomiting again. All that came up was bile and sludge. Dear God, how long would it take for this to get that crap out of him? He shoved his fingers down his throat and forced up another round of heaving and bile to come up. This time there was no sludge, which relieved some of his anxiety, but not all of it. When Izuku finally felt less repulsive, he collapsed onto the tile floor. He stared at the water as it trailed across the tiles and into the drain in the center of the room. He watched it coil around the drain head and glug down the holes. He imagined it was his soul washing down the pipes, along with his crushed dreams and hopes. His phone was buzzing and beeping on the counter every few seconds. He knew why. He just posted that the number one hero was unsafe. He imagined several people were trying to check in on him. The news had probably already revealed the villain or might just captured. Izuku pulled his legs up to his chest and buried his face into the wet skin of his knees. He didn't answer the phone. Someone or multiple someones would show up at his door for a wellness check. The police would never do a wellness check for quirkless people, but the community cared about its own. The elders were probably on their way over, but Izuku couldn't bring himself to move. He couldn't get up or grab his phone. He couldn't move. His body was frozen, shivering on the bathroom floor. In the seconds between throwing up and coiling in on himself, Izuku had decided he would wage a holy war against the world. But that war looked a lot like staring at the tiles of his bathroom floor between his knees, and begged his body to move just an inch. Sometime later, a knock brought his mind back to the present. The clock on the wall showed it was past 2 a.m. How was he still awake? Izuku? He knew that voice. Osamu. It was his mentor. Izuku, I'm coming in. Izuku had given him a key not long after his second suicide attempt. His mentor was about 35, one of the oldest Quirkless people left in the community. One of the oldest Quirkless people left in Musatafu, and even in this region of the country. He was a mentor to several kids, but Izuku had been his first mentee after losing his own child to suicide about a decade ago. The man was tall, lanky, with kind eyes and an even softer voice. He didn't speak much unless it was necessary, but Izuku found comfort in that silence. Izuku! Osamu grabbed a towel from the rack on the wall and wrapped it around him quickly as he came to Izuku's side. This wasn't the first time the man had found Izuku in such a poor mental state, but it was the first time he found him shivering on the bathroom floor naked. Are you hurt? Did you hurt yourself? Izuku shook his head just an inch. Relief washed over Osamu. Even if Izuku wouldn't look at the man, he could feel the release of tension from the room. Once Osamu was sure Izuku wasn't hurt, he slid himself behind the team and wrapped a comforting arm around Izuku, chin on his shoulder. Comforting silence took over the bathroom. Izuku finally let himself break. Tears poured down his face, getting the fresh towel soaked and leaving his mentor's arms covered in salty water. Osamu didn't care. He rocked them back and forth without saying a word. He held Izuku, brushed his hand through his black-green curls, and comforted him like no one in his own family had ever done. Izuku sobbed for what felt like hours, but it made him feel better, if only slightly. Do you want to talk about it? Osamu asked when Izuku calmed down. Izuku shrugged. A villain tried to. He was made of sludge. He wanted a skin suit to hide in. The man behind him choked back a gag. All Might stopped him. I had to ask. I had to. He was my hero. Another fresh wave of tears dribbled down his face. I saw your post. Izuku nodded. The police, they thought I was brain dead. I was trying to sign my voice. Osamu hugged him tighter. I kept trying to remind myself that I'm stronger, that if it doesn't kill me, it'll make me stronger, but Izuku, sometimes suffering is just suffering. It doesn't make you stronger or build character. Sometimes it just hurts. Why? Izuku clutched his hands over his face and screamed. He screamed because there was simply nothing else he could do. There was no other way to let out the misery swelling in his chest. He wanted to be better than them, but he didn't see a life where they could exist safely if they just kept letting the world treat them worse than animals. Because people are cruel. That was the most Osamu had spoken in a long time, and he had to wonder if it was because Osamu was scared that he might lose Izuku after this incident. Because thorns are biased and taught that we are less than, that we are not the same, that we are not human. Izuku nodded. He knew the speech by heart, but he still wanted to hear it. And in truth, we aren't equal. We are not equal to them. We are nothing like them. They are monsters, abusers, they are violent dogs. We are not like them. We are better, kinder, and we will show them who we are through our suffering. But what was all this suffering going to get them? Nothing. What did all the suffering really get them? Nothing. Izuku saw no point in it. I want to be alone, he mumbled. I promise I'm not going to hurt myself. I just need to think. I need some time alone. That's okay. Okay, Osamu stood up slowly, his knees creaking from the effort. I'll let the community know you're okay for now, but I'll be checking in on you tomorrow afternoon. Is that alright? Izuku nodded. Thank you, Samu. The man nodded, a singular grunt as his goodbye. That was more like the mentor Izuku knew. He smiled with his cheek on his knee as Osamu left, shutting each door behind him as he went. Izuku did not move for the next hour. Sometime past 3 a.m., he scraped himself off the bathroom tiles and put on comfy sweatpants and a giant t-shirt. He opened his laptop on his way back to his bedroom. It started beeping immediately. Alerts from the forums mostly. He sighed. The laptop was settled on his legs as he got comfortable in bed. That's not good. He had at least 24 replies to the posts he'd made earlier, and several other messages from friends and other members he was close to in the community. It took a while to get to them all, but he did manage to get each message. A few people messaged back, but most of them were probably already asleep. He combed through the forums to make sure there wasn't any concerning posts and closed his laptop to the corner of his bed. Izuku wiped a hand down his face. All Might's words rolled around in his head, mixed with Osamu's. Suffering was just suffering, and he needed to find a more realistic dream. So why was he suffering for no reason? Why was he trying to be hopeful when all it would get him were bloodied lips and a soured heart? Realistic. What the hell did that even mean? What was even the realistic choice for Izuku? He kicked his feet over the bed and wandered to the shelf. 4 out of the 8 rows were filled with his analysis journals. At one point, Izuku believed there would be his ticket to becoming a hero, even if he had to be a support hero. But now they felt like weights on his chest. Why bother analyzing heroes if he could never be one himself? In a sudden fit of anger, he started to rip the journals off from the shelves, scattering them around the room. He nearly pulled the damn shelf down, leaving a whole row's worth of his manga collection spread around the floor as well. He kicked a few notebooks with his bare foot until the most recent one turned up. Hero Analysis Journal for the Future, number 87. 87. He was amazed at how he analysed 87 different heroes and fellow classmates. He knew number 45 was Katsuki Bakugo, his ex-best friend. Izuku tossed the newest journal onto the desk and collapsed into the chair. So I was just taking a drink. He paged through the book. Sketches of endeavours stared back at him. Izuku had broken down every piece of his hero suit, his persona, and even his fighting skills and special moves. He ripped apart the man's strengths and weaknesses, and then went on for pages about how those strengths could be torn down, and all the ways his weaknesses could be exploited. All these years, the Quirkless community had raised him to think that they were secretly, quietly better than all those cruel people who had abused them. All those damn years, he tried so hard just to survive. If he made it to adulthood, he'd be free, right? But Osamu wasn't any better off than Izuku was. He struggled finding and keeping jobs, paying bills, and even being treated like a human being on a regular basis. So what was the point? If growing up wasn't any better, why should they grow up in the first place? Izuku was not suicidal, not right now at least, but growing up felt, well, pointless. The notebook pages fluttered in the wind, drawing his attention back to his desk. The breeze from his window stopped, leaving the notebook open to the page about Endeavor's weaknesses. Pointless. Growing up would be pointless, unless he had a way to change the world around him, unless he could find a way to put an end to quirkless discrimination. Izuku was probably the best quirk analyst in the city. He knew that with no doubt. He read the studies on quirks, the reports and journals submitted for peer reviews from the top analysts in the country. They were hacks. They couldn't see past their bias. They couldn't see weakness. They could only see power. But Izuku could see every little kink in their armor. He could see every little weak spot that the heroes themselves didn't know about. Grabbing notebook 45, he flipped over to Katsuki's weaknesses and refreshed his memory, as if he needed it. Cold. That was Katsuki's major weakness. Cold and specifically cold water. His quirk depended on him sweating, producing nitroglycerin in the form of sweat on his palms. Without that sweat, he was effectively powerless. Did that mean he was a good fighter? No. Did that mean he wasn't a good fighter? No, but it would make him quirkless, and Izuku knew he could win a quirkless fight. A slow grin appeared on his lips. There was no reason to grow up in this cruel world. There was no point to growing up abused if he wasn't going to end that cycle of abuse. So that's what Izuku decided to do then and there. Izuku would put an end to the cycle of abuse by proving to the abusers that quirkless people were more than beasts to kick on the ground. He would prove to them that they were the weak ones, and they had been blinded by power, by bias, and ignorance. They could only see the flashiness of a quirk and not the usefulness of an intelligent mind. But Izuku wasn't stupid. He knew he needed to prepare, and if he was truly going to walk down this path, Izuku chuckled to himself. Yeah, this path. Maybe that's what All Might meant. He really needed to get rid of his hero merch. He couldn't stand standing at that stupid smile staring down at him from every wall and shelf of his room. Later. Right now, he pulled up his laptop and got to work. If he was going to give the world one last chance to win him back. If UA High denied him, like every other school, then he would prove it to them in his way. So he prepared himself for both outcomes, but expected the latter. Okay everyone, that was chapter 1 of It's Not Love If You Run When It's Hard. I messed up the title in the intro. I said it's not love if you run away when it's hard, but there's no way, as you can see by the card on the screen. Anyway, I've only read up to chapter 5 in this fic, so I don't know everything about this either. But I really love this fic, and I have my scheduled channel fic reading time in an hour, half an hour actually, after I eat dinner. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure to take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.